The last years New Zealand's going in not the best direction. A lot of virtue signaling and not a lot of economic activity. And when I came to Zuitzerland in Montenegro, it was like, oh, okay, this is what it feels like to find your people. Working for a bank is a terrible place to figure out how fintech works. People who are partners in VC funds are not always the right people to be making decisions. Zuitzerland is kind of like group therapy for people on the spectrum. The principle is technology is good, we should accelerate it, but we should do it in a way where it's safe and where we don't end up as NPCs. And my experiences with decentralized projects have not always been good. Silicon Valley is like move fast and break things, and Switzerland is move fast and try not to break things.
Thank you everyone for being here for ARC's Firesides with Network and City States. I'm very glad to be joined by Isla from Zuitzerland, which I think I now pronounce right after being around UK overnight. Thank you very much for being here. I've got loads of questions for you about Zuitzerland. It's not a surprise, but why don't we talk a little bit about yourself first? Like where are you from?
I am from New Zealand.
So not Switzerland?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm hoping that after pitching Zuitzerland and Switzerland to 100K people online the other day, they might consider me for citizenship soon, but no, not from Switzerland yet.
Okay,
I'll be there 10 years though. I've been there 10 years next year, so I can apply officially next year.
Okay, very, very cool. I mean, we're about, God, I mean, New Zealand is just so far away. Like we're like in Singapore and it's still so far away, right?
Yeah.
When's the last time you went back?
I try to go back every year for a month, get away from the European winter and get some vitamin D. It is a wonderful place to recharge, but I do feel like nothing else happens there.
Did you consider it as a permanent location? Or
I would love it if someone built a permanent zoo location there, and I've been like, there's a couple of people that have been like giving little trying to nerd snipe them into doing it, because I do think that New Zealand would actually be a fantastic location to do.
Where everyone's going in their bunkers, isn't that right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's going, I don't know, personally, I feel like in the last years, New Zealand's going in not the best direction. A lot of virtue signaling and not a lot of economic activity. So I would love it if actually we could do something there and trigger some excitement. But unfortunately right now I've got better things to do.
No, good. But basically,
unfortunately.
So you've been in Switzerland for 10 years. What were you up to there?
What was I up to there? Okay, so I started my career in venture capital just before I moved to Switzerland, and kind of was super young at the time and realized this is an incredible industry, but also I'm way too young to be telling these founders what to do, and I should try and build something myself first. And I thought quite naively, I want to build something in fintech, so I'll go and work for a bank and figure out how things work. Working for a bank is a terrible place to figure out how fintech works. But I ended up at UBS and ended up in the global ultra high net worth and doing some really interesting stuff around investment strategy and working on some products. We worked on an ETF focused around diversity that has over $1 billion under management, and working on that and doing all the data around that led me to thinking even more about how capital allocation needs to be improved. And I'd already from the VC world been thinking decision making needs to be improved. Saw this then at the bank and was going okay, we can definitely improve this. Was looking at a lot at the data and how just venture capital decision making is poor, and we can improve venture capital outcomes so much by doing a better job of how we do venture capital. And so kind of towards my end of the time at the bank started to get pretty burned out, and there was a moment of discovering Ethereum and discovering decentralization, and just got really nerd sniped into that and looking at venture DAOs as a path forward for venture capital.
Okay, wait. So from VC to high net worth banking to venture DAOs.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird journey, right?
Yeah. No. It makes a lot of sense. No, it does. But explain that move into venture DAOs then. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when I was at the VC fund, there were a few decisions that were made where I was just yeah, okay, people who are partners in VC funds are not always the right people to be making decisions. And then when I was at the bank, I was seeing all of the data that's backing that up. um, if you have, for example, diversity in VC funds, the outcomes are like on average 20% better, and yet nobody is doing it. And there are structural reasons for that. There are also like talent pipeline reasons for that. There's like a lot of reasons for that. Um, but it was becoming super clear to me like how we make decisions really matters, and there's a lot of upside to be gained both on like an economic level and on a social level by allocating capital better. And like the one thing that we need to figure out how to do in society if we want to fund the right things is like, how do we fund the right things? And yeah, I don't know how did I get from that to like okay, essentially I realized like we need to restructure venture capital, and there was like a 6-month journey of like, how do we restructure venture capital? Okay, we need more decision makers. How do we get more decision makers? Oh, okay, actually there's a talent pipeline issue because like a lot of people don't get into the industry in the first place. It's not a meritocracy at all at the moment. Um, and from there kind of was like, okay, we need a lot of decision makers. And someone said to me, have you looked at venture DAOs? Have you looked at the Lao, which was the first real venture DAO? And I went and looked at the Lao and went like, holy shit, this solves for X, Y, and Z that we've been saying that we need to fix. And realized like, yeah, okay, there's something here that we can work with, and spent then 2 or 3 years trying to build like essentially a fund of funds, or like a venture fund of venture funds. And we were kind of on a good path actually, but then like just as we were about to raise like a big seed round, FTX happened, and literally every investor in the space just stopped answering any of their emails for a good 6 months. So I went off on a different path into like the foundations world and started doing like grants, making stuff and looking at it from that angle. And then around that time, Zuitzerland happened in Montenegro. And we'd also in that journey, we'd been looking a lot at like using prediction markets and conviction markets to do capital allocation as like an optimized version of like, how do we really decentralize this process? How do we bring like track record on chain and make it truly meritocratic? And we came to Zuitzerland, Montenegro, and just like suddenly there was this group of people that were all thinking in not the same direction, but like we had all of the pieces of the puzzle in one place. And that kind of led to being like, okay, let's build more of these things. And yeah, this is how we get to the bigger picture.
How was Zuzalu?
How was Zuzalu? Yeah, I think I said it the other day. Like my parents always told me, when you go to university, you will find your people, and I kind of found some of them at university, but not to a huge degree. Um, and when I came to Zuzalu in Montenegro, it was like, oh, okay, this is what it feels like to find your people. And yeah, ever since then, basically, just wanting to make that feeling permanent and wanting to make villages that enable really high agency, really ambitious people to build cool shit.
Mhm.
Um,
Like I said, yeah, what was it about Zuzalu that you liked so much? I mean, like Zuzalu, for anyone listening, right, was a 2-month long sort of pop-up, originally sort of instigated by Vitalik Buterin in Montenegro, where a whole bunch of people just went and hung out and lived together on the coast for 2 months and worked and played and experimented together. But I guess like, yeah, what was so special about it for you?
I think because it was such high signal, like every single person there was doing something quite interesting, or was at the very least thinking about doing something really interesting. You could relax in a way of like, you could sit down at the breakfast table and not talk about all the things you're doing, but just get to know the people, because you knew that one way or another you were going to find the conversation really interesting and high value. And um, it was just, it was like you were able to spend the time getting to know the people and building relationships, and then discover through that building of relationships ways to build and collaborate together, rather than kind of the conference vibe of you're there for a day and you have to like sift through 200 people to find one that's relevant, and therefore it's very transactional and completely unpleasant for people in the spectrum. Like I often joke that like Zuzulu is kind of like group therapy for people in the spectrum, like, or at the very least neurospicy people. And yeah, it's it does feel like that, of just like a lot of people who've otherwise spent a lot of time kind of trying to find each other can just like be together and solve things.
Mhm.
And I said it the other day, I think like I had the sense that like if any group of people could solve the problems that we're facing over the next like 10, 20, 30 years, then it was that group of people. And sure, there's also a lot of people beyond that, but it was like, okay, there's something here, there's a seed of something that can fix a lot of things. And I felt that energy again the other day at Balaji's Network State Conference. It was like, okay, what was like 200 people maybe in Montenegro is now like becoming bigger. And that was really exciting.
It was a good day. It was a
Yeah.
good day. So to take us through the journey from having an amazing experience at Zuitzerland to now basically leading one of the main sort of like Zuitzerland offshoots. What happened between those?
Yeah. So just after Montenegro, there was something in Istanbul called Zoo Connect for 2 weeks where I think there were some talks going on in the background where I wasn't involved. I was quite new to the community, but there was sort of an attempt at centralizing the whole thing to a very small group of people, and it was becoming quite conflict oriented. And I think Vitalik just made the decision, like, screw this, like, let's decentralize. And I don't know if that was his real thought, but it felt like his meta thought was, let's turn this into like a little like Darwinian competition of like who creates something meaningful and not like not just like hand it to someone. And so from that he said like I'm going to fund some things, and there were a bunch of projects that were created out of that. And I was actually upset when he decentralized, to be honest, initially, because I really enjoyed Montenegro and my experiences with decentralized projects have not always been good. And I was like, don't turn this into something shitty. I want the good products that we have.
Yeah.
But I've kind of got to, I was like, okay, well, if we're decentralizing, then we better make sure we build something good. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized like we're in Switzerland. If anywhere needs to have a Zuzulu, then it's Switzerland. And then we went a lot deeper into like the philosophy behind Switzerland, the culture of Switzerland, how like Switzerland has over the last 700 years actually developed what you can call like a very advanced cultural technology around decentralization, the principle of subsidiarity, and the way that they govern their cantons and like federal government is unique. They also have a direct democracy, which is really well functioning, contrary to what most people would expect for a direct democracy. And we realized actually that what they're doing right, or like the magic sauce behind that, is that Switzerland manages to balance individual freedom with collective thriving and integrate the things that are needed for both of those things to happen. And that's essentially like at the core of DIAC. And so we realized like, hey, Vitalik's writing about DIAC. He's written this My Techno-Optimism essay. I think like if we're going to try and get DIAC into the world and build more of these technologies in a safe way, then Switzerland's kind of one of the right places to be building for that and designing for that.
I have so many questions, but I mean, maybe just start with
Me too.
explain. Yeah, that's great. This is great. This is what we do, right? Um, what is Zuitzerland? Just explain a bit more about what you're actually working on first.
Um, so Zuitzerland is going to be a permanent village in Switzerland dedicated to accelerating open source and DIAC aligned technology. What is DIAC aligned? Essentially, like the principle is technology is good, we should accelerate it, but we should do it in a way where it's safe and where we don't end up as NPCs, and where humans retain freedom and agency. So Vitalik talks about decentralized, democratic, differential, and defensive. And I think he says like defensive and decentralized being the two more important ones. But I think what the one that's underestimated or people don't give a lot of attention to is differential. And that's something I think that Switzerland does really well, is like nuance, essentially, of like not black and white thinking, but like finding those grays and like integrating them case by case for the right solution. And that's kind of, they don't have a high conflict culture, but they have a high dialogue culture. And so there's a lot to be learned there in terms of how do we build societies that are more DIAC. They managed to have the highest innovation per capita in the world for a nation state. Silicon Valley's is higher as a state. But I would say, I also said the other day, like Silicon Valley is like move fast and break things, and Switzerland is move fast and try not to break things. And that's exactly like kind of the core of DIAC. So, yeah.
But I needed some DIAC UV lights in my taxi the other day where the driver was spluttering, and that's why I literally was like, fuck, what if we were more of this here? But okay, interesting, right? So again, Switzerland ran a pop-up earlier this year.
Yeah.
Part of your sort of like journey with all this. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we ran a pop-up village for 4 weeks in May, had 200 people there. The main focus that we set for it was like, how do we design these permanent? Like, we knew we wanted something to be permanent. We'd also seen like a lot of pop-ups, and there were a lot of questions for us around like, how do we do residency in these things? What does residency mean in the context of one of these like startup societies? What does citizenship mean? How do you get there? How do you like achieve those things in this new modern society that we're trying to create? How do we fund these things? And so we were just like had a lot of design questions essentially, and had over the 4 weeks we had like 1 week on just learning from Swiss democracy and what's been done. And 1 week on how do we fund these kind of things and how do we create economies around them. Yeah, and honestly, right now I'm forgetting a couple of other things, but there were some really, really interesting conversations there.
Fine. So, and I guess he used it as this melting pot to discuss all these key concepts and to make a plan of what next. I guess that what is the plan right now? What are you trying to do with Switzerland?
The plan is to essentially use Zuitzerland as a pilot for how do we turn these villages into accelerators for this kind of tech, and how do we use these villages as a place where we fund open source technology, fund things that are aligned with the ACT principles, and do so in a way that's actually financially sustainable. So I've been working over summer with Vitalik to design a kind of a governance and a token economic model around how we actually create these and fund them. And the funding part is difficult, but we've taken inspiration from like Harvard and Stanford in terms of like, so these Harvard, Stanford, MIT Media Lab, they have large pieces of real estate campuses. They create this kind of scenius around high intellect people that come there and add value to the ecosystem. What they don't, so that they also like subsidize those people with research and scholarships and things. What they don't do though, or at least not to a huge degree, is like actually invest in those people and get the upside from the things they create. So like if Stanford had like a little share in everyone that ever went through there, I think their endowment fund would be even bigger than it is. So we're like learning from that and saying like, what can we add to have essentially from the people that come through this, if they end up commercializing or if they end up tokenizing, we have like a little percentage of that from having funded and accelerated them early on. And if you think about like, Ethereum, Aave, Uniswap, all open source projects, but like if you had a little share in each of those, you'd be doing quite well.
Yeah, you'd be all right.
Yeah.
And I guess that you're trying to do this via a permanent physical location that you are renting, owning, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Probably around the place that you ran the pop-up sort of like before.
Yeah.
I think there's some interesting things there with them even wanting to tokenize part of their business and all the rest of it there.
Yeah.
I guess why is that physical part so important to this? Like why is that involved as well?
Yeah. So I'll start with the first part of the question. So we had to pop up at this ski resort. They've actually become very excited about how we can bring our token into their ecosystem and essentially bring the resort long term maybe on chain, and turn that into like one token economy, and then there could be multiple resorts and economies all like feeding into this token ecosystem. So we're talking to them about that, and we're also talking to Canton Zug blockchain initiative and the universities and trying to figure out a more permanent living situation nearer to the cities, that would be like more the monasteries. So Vitalik talked about the monasteries and the embassies. The embassies, a lot of people come through. So maybe the resort in Lax would be where all the people come through for like shorter events or offsites and things. And then the thing in Canton Zug or in a more urban hub would be the monastery where it's long term and you're working on solving the problems. And to the other part of the question, which was, sorry, what was the other part of the question?
God, just go like, why are the physical? Why is
Oh yeah, the physical, that's
well
important. Yeah,
important, right?
exactly. So what we've observed with all of these pop-up villages is that they actually are incredible concentrators of legitimacy. So with the social graph that you create over 4 weeks or 2 months, you essentially have kind of like a decentralized due diligence process for the builders that you bring through. And, like most good investors will sort of say something along the lines of lines, not dots. So you don't invest in something when you see it the first time. Like ideally you invest when like you've seen someone evolving a little bit over time. And these hubs create kind of an automated decentralized process for that. And so the way that we're starting to think about it is that each of these hubs becomes a legitimacy concentrator for finding the right talent in that geographic area. And then you have in each one an acceleration fund or an endowment fund that funds them. And then there's maybe like a fund of funds that's funding the wider pool of all of these hubs in a transnational network. Yeah, so that's where the physical part is, especially with like AI and everything that's happening. It's becoming harder and harder to gauge legitimacy online. So the physical part is becoming actually more important.
Yeah, no, interesting. I mean, Vitalik also said this week about co-working spaces. Okay, it's great. Accelerators of okay, it's great.
Yeah.
But he was much more interested in these sort of like cultural or philosophical sort of experiments on top of those things, right?
Yeah.
Which I guess for Switzerland is DIAC. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say that like our hope is definitely that DIAC is one of the main philosophies that is between a lot of these hubs. But it definitely doesn't need to be the only one. And I think, yeah, when we talk about, like Vitalik was talking about social innovation, one thing that we looked into a bit when we were researching all of this is there's a lot of research and sociology on free social spaces and the importance of these, and free social spaces not necessarily needing to be physical spaces, but they often are. But essentially what they provide is a niche that is somewhat sheltered from the wider kind of society and hegemony, and allow for radical social innovation in a small space to take place, to evolve, and then get ready to be actually bridged to the wider society. And yeah, I think that what we do have in these physical spaces are free social spaces that allow us to experiment with things that we couldn't otherwise experiment with and that we couldn't otherwise scale. And I'm starting to look at them as like kind of the innovation labs for countries. And I come from I studied strategy and innovation, and one of the things that is like part of the research in the like corporate innovation space is that it's hard for established companies to innovate. It's usually like hard for them within their existing structure to like do both exploit of the current markets they're in and explore. And I think that there's something you can transfer there to nation states where they've got like this big existing structure and they're in exploit mode of like, this is what we've got. But there's like a lot happening where they would need to be in explore mode because whatever is coming next, they're not ready for. And I think that like what we're doing with these startup societies is kind of providing like the explore mode for nation states to be able to like prepare something that's more like future proof. So that's how I'm starting to think about it. Yeah.
Interesting. Switzerland's pretty expensive.
Yeah.
But it's tricky, right, in terms of the accessibility of these sort of like products, right?
Yeah.
And like how actually like a lot of the community has like very, very different sort of like financial capabilities.
Yeah.
We have extremes, right? We've got founders that are bootstrapping themselves and every day like they're on the ramen diet.
Yeah.
And then we've got, Vitalik or what, right? And so we've got these really, really different sort of things. How do you think about creating a product that both ends of that spectrum, I guess, can sort of like come and be a part of?
Yeah, I think again, like you can look at Harvard or Stanford as an interesting model. They've obviously got plenty of students coming there that are paying like quite large sums to be there and take advantage of the legitimacy that they have. And then you have a lot of people that are also on full scholarships and not paying a single cent. And so I would say that with the endowment fund that we want to build up, the idea is to be able to just like select for people's talent and potential, and subsidize the people that we want to be there, but also be able to charge for people that can easily pay. There's also some interesting experiments to be done, like in the token economic side of things, with like people like Vitalik. Yes, they can pay, but they also bring like huge positive externalities in terms of the legitimacy. So like, could you reward people in that token model for those positive externalities? And we're looking at like a staking model. So instead of just staking with capital, you actually stake somehow into this ecosystem with your legitimacy. And one way of staking is actually like by being present in the community. It's not the only way, because you need people to contribute and add value, and a lot of people being present that aren't high value is not going to add value. But figuring out how to like internalize those positive externalities and the negative ones, yeah, like that, there's a lot of interesting things that can be done there.
So I guess again, you mentioned again the sort of decentralization of the Zuitzerland movement. That was obviously ended up being beneficial in the end for you, I guess, right? Because you were able to sort of like create sort of steam in the because of that, right? But I guess like where is that movement at the minute? How do you see that sort of progressing? And I guess like how do you see Zuitzerland as well progressing, I guess, now over the coming years?
So how do I see the movement? So like in my limited view of the world, Zuitzerland should become this transnational network of DIAC permanent hubs. So definitely the movement has moved towards permanent hubs. Pop-ups I would see pop-ups as like the pilots for permanent hubs. Like if you identify a location, like, okay, say New Zealand, we think it could be promising, you might run a pop-up and say, okay, like proof of concept, who can we bring together? What is like, also testing the founders of that, can they execute on that? And then the permanent thing is the vision. And so definitely like the energy has moved towards the permanent villages being the point. And yeah, my personal view is like, let's use them to accelerate the technologies that we want instead of the technologies that we don't want, or accelerate the technologies we want in a way that we want them accelerated, which is more decentralized and democratic, or open source. But there might be other things completely outside of that bubble that, like, I think Vitalik has said something like he wants these to all be like different little cultures and their own little sort of things. And I guess there's sort of a Darwinian aspect to it of like what evolves essentially. So yeah, it's experimental and frontier and constantly evolving, but we're also, I think, starting to see at least one good and clear path forward.
I mean, you're carrying the flag, I guess, at the minute for.
I don't know about, like, I don't know. I mean, I like to think so maybe, but like at the same time, we're a decentralized movement, and yeah, I don't know if that would be Vitalik's official view. But like, of course, I would love to believe that.
But then, so your hope is that you're able to basically build some permanent locations in Switzerland, have these people that are living there permanently,
Yeah.
that are building DIAC technologies, that you're funding, getting upsized in the minimum endowment-like approach, and then creating, I guess, this sort of like nice flywheel of
Yes.
economic growth that's
Yeah.
within this philosophy and pushing, I guess, a DIAC sort of like future.
Yeah. And so one thing that we're starting to push towards is like, we've been thinking like, we need to build a VC fund or like this endowment fund around this. But it's actually not super easy for any one person or hub to raise a fund. So what we need is actually also the fund of funds. So now we're starting to think, okay, like let's design the fund of funds for DIAC cities. And that's kind of like where our head is at right now, is like, yes, building our thing, but also we need this DIAC fund of funds. And
that fund of funds would be investing in each of your permanent locations, or I guess like what would what funds would it be investing in?
yeah, so each physical location that acts as a legitimacy concentrator would have its own kind of acceleration fund or endowment fund, and the fund of funds, if we bring this together, would invest in each location that is willing to commit to open source and DIAC, and there would be like some economic model of return to the fund of funds that sustains the fund of funds. But yeah, like I have some ideas, but I don't want to go into them too much right now in terms of like the details. But um, there's some pretty cool thoughts happening there.
No, it's great. Well, so when can people, or how do people get involved with Switzerland at the minute?
I think the best way is like join our Telegram updates group, t.me/Zuitzerland. We are doing a residency from about April onwards next year in Knox. It will be a longer residency and will hopefully just directly translate into the permanent village. So we'll start there in Knox and then probably move into more permanent living next summer in Zug, and have the combination between Zug and Knox. But still a few things to be like signed on the dots. So yeah, hold for updates.
Okay, super cool. Like, that's exciting. Somewhere nice to visit in Switzerland. And thank you very much for coming on and telling us all about it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jane.
Cool. Cheers. Okay.
We got arrested for going there from Serbia, and once we got arrested there for going there from Croatia, after initial sticking the flag. We were one of those generation of crazy Czechs that tried to survive communism in Czechoslovakia. I was always arguing to switch Czech Republic into Swiss-like model, and I ended up doing some marketing campaign for them, which they didn't pay for, by the way. So I still have a claim towards Brittaville. We have an investment plan for the region, which is like $30 million. I would like to deploy 10 in Liberland, 10 in Croatia, 10 in Serbia. We actually decided that there will be elections for ambassadors as well. I mean, Croatia is still not recognized by 12 countries in the world. It's kind of crazy.